I'm going to do something a little different today. Normally, I'm a fan of over-ear headphones or in-ear monitors. And there are a few exceptions to that. I shouldn't say exceptions. I've found on-ear headphones that I've enjoyed. And at first, I was sort of turned off by them. My first two pair of on-ear headphones were, I think it was the Sennheiser HD25 1.2 or whatever the model is for that, and the Beats Solo 2, I believe. And I was shocked by the Solo, because I actually had to reduce the bass response by like 11 dB in the equalizer for it to sound somewhat normal. And two, because both of them had such a terrible clamp on the head that it was just uncomfortable to listen to for any extended period of time. And by extended, I really mean like more than 30 minutes. And even before that, it was uncomfortable, just it was bearable. But it becomes it borderlines unbearable after that time period. So some time passes, and I just wanted to try something different. So there's a few lower priced headphones that I was able to come across either through sale, mass drop, that kind of thing. And the two that I kind of zeroed in on, one was Koss, just because A, it's kind of a meme at this point in time. B, it is relatively affordable. And it's one of the few headphones that's actually, made by an American company at this point in time that's under like $200. So I went with the Koss, and I also wanted to give these Sonys a try because they just popped up on my Amazon feed on a daily sale for like $10, and I figured why not. But normally they're in a pretty similar price category, which is around $20-$25, depending on the model. You'll notice that I actually put the Yaxi pads on the Koss. I think stock. Oh, my dog wants in. Come on in. Stock, hi. The foam's a little too thin, and it adds to the discomfort. The Axi pads do help with that, but they're still not a solution in my eyes. It just extends the period of time before the discomfort becomes too much, in my opinion. But anyway, here they are. And, never mind the white aesthetic. I just think it's a nice change of pace because most of my headphones are black. But anyway. So yeah, these are the Sony, I want to say ZX110. And of course the Koss KPH30i. Both of them have fixed cables. They're both on-ear headphones. They're both largely made of plastic. Does the Koss have a mic? I think the Koss has an inbuilt mic. and level built into the cable, whereas the Sony is just the cable. And the cable itself, the cable itself on the Sony almost feels like stereo cable. You know, those like ridged, like fused together molded plastic with like the copper running through parallel channels. That's what it feels like, as opposed to like this very clean kind of single cable that the Koss is using. So I think in terms of the cable itself, I'm going to have to give Koss the edge. The Sony is more robust feeling, but it's also kind of bulky. And out of the box, it was kind of janked. It actually did straighten up quite a bit just by letting it sit over the top of one of my, what was it called? A C grip or something that I used for some of my lighting. It was basically it's just a metal bar, and I just let it set over that. And it did straighten out for the most part. Continuing on with build, though, I mean, so the Koss is pretty simple, right? The Koss is pretty simple. You got that little inner headband. You have plastic. You have little clicky adjustments. But it, despite being on the smaller side, it still feels pretty solid. The Koss, I'm trying to remember. I don't think these fold up. I think it's just, small and light. And they both fit that category, but I think doesn't get that much smaller. On the other hand, the Sonys actually do fold up. If I can remember how. There we go. So they actually, they are packable, I guess you could say. But the build quality itself on them, I think because they have those moving parts, it sounds cheap. I mean, let me see if I can get the sound. And you don't get that at all from the Koss. I mean, you can kind of hear the drivers moving around, but it's not rattly the same way that the Sony is. So I'm not sure about the long-term build quality. I've just been using... I mean, the Koss I've had for a while, but the Sony I've had for like 5-6 days, and I've enjoyed using them. I've actually worn them outside, which is pretty unusual for me. But that's kind of the point of on-ear headphones, I feel like. So that's just what I've been doing with them. And I haven't had any problems. I mean, the fit out of the box was fine. I was expecting to hate these ear pads because of how thin they were. And I normally don't like this almost kind of thin plastic, like grocery bag texture on the ear pads, but they were okay. I'm debating if it's worth investing more into getting a potential replacement for these ear pads, just because they're not great. They're just better than I expected. Yeah. So like out of the box, that's it. I'm actually going to do something a little different that I haven't done before, which is actually to compare these head to head. So I've listened to the Koss for a good amount now. I've listened to the Sonys for a good amount now, but never side by side. But because they're in the same price category, and I think they're relatively going after the same market, I want to see if the Koss deserve the praise that people tend to lavish on them, even if partially as a joke. I'm going to be honest, when I first got these, I didn't understand why everyone was so excited. And I think part of that has to do with the fact that out of the box, the tuning is not to my preference. And even sort of beyond that, with all of like the inexpensive IEMs we have coming out now, it's really hard to make me drop my jaw at lower priced quality. And between those two things, I feel like it was overhyped. I think that's what the problem was for me, because I don't think they sound bad. They just didn't sound as good as I expected for everyone to lose their collective minds over. So I'm going to go ahead and throw on some tracks. I already have a headphone list of sorts, I believe, set up. So I'm going to pull that up in the meantime. Do I? I do. Okay. And basically the way I'm doing this, I have both hooked up to a Mackie HM4, which is a tiny little headphone amp with 4 separate amp sections for 4 different outputs. And so I can actually run them all on the same amplifier, and I don't have to worry about, whether the difference in impedance is going to be an issue. And I've already got them level balanced. I spent the time doing that beforehand. So they're good to go. They're all in the same amp. The amp is getting the same source because there's only one input on it. So I've tried to create as equal a playing field here as possible. So never mind, if you will, the source equipment. I will say, however, that these have both been fine with mobile sources. I've used it with the Sony NWA45 and the FiO X1 Mark II. So it should be good in that regard. It should be good. This is just, for comparative purposes, less than real world use, because real world I would probably be comparing them out of a FiO. It would just be kind of a pain in the butt to swap back and forth on the input. And this way I can just take the headphones off and put them on. It's a very, very simplified process. Okay. So I got the playlist pulled up already. I'm going to be starting off with the City of Prague Philharmonic playing Star Wars A New Hope as conducted by, what was it, John Williams? Did he actually conduct this? I think he did. All right. Wait, let's restart. So first is going to be the Sonys. They actually have a decent sense of space. I'm noticing that the brass section that's playing the main line is kind of lacking a little bit of energy. But the tuba and the drums have a little bit more energy than I'm used to hearing, which isn't bad per se. And the woodwinds sound decent. A little bit more recessed, so I'm wondering if there's like a recess in the mids. But it could just be the way that they're playing. There's a little bit of congestion when the energy comes up, da na 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 na. When it hits that point, it feels like the drivers are kind of being pushed their limit. The kettle drum's actually coming out pretty okay. And the tonality, to my ears, is actually kind of enjoyable. But we're going to move on. Maybe something... So one of the tracks I like to use is New Retrowave's Magnetron is the album. Kick Puncher is the name of the song. It's got some really deep bass that sort of fades in the beginning. And then there's a build up, and when the drop comes, you really get that. Yeah. The synth actually sounds pretty good on this. Because these are inexpensive Sony headphones, I'm sort of wondering if they're tuned more for like pop music, Billboard type, tracks. And so like smaller, more electronic music might be what this is geared towards, if I'm guessing. With the potential of like, maybe boosting mids a little bit for vocals, but I don't. This actually sounds pretty good. There's I don't even know what they're going for, but there's a point in the music where it sort of felt like an arpeggio thing going on, and it traverses right to left and back again, and actually does that pretty well. That's interesting. So the bass that comes through at one point of the song gets sort of quiet but deeper. It extends deeper down. And it's just, I think the drivers were just barely able to dig that deep, and it was kind of like scraping the bottom of the barrel. But it managed it. It's actually pretty fun to listen to. I have to admit. That's not bad. Let's try Nirvana. It actually handles the grungy sound really well. The guitars actually have a rich tone to it. It's pretty surprisingly good. Kurt sounds pretty good. There's a tiny bit. There's a tiny bit of air in there, which I wouldn't have expected. They're a tiny, no, not tiny. They're a bit recessed, but I'm not sure if that's the mixing. I'm gonna go to something where the vocals are a little bit more forward. Let's see here. Tears for Fears. Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Ooh. Okay. Yeah, there is a warmth to these where the treble is definitely being held back some. I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing, because I tend to prefer some warmth in headphones. Let's see. Yeah, these actually sound pretty good. There are bits and pieces where the presentation starts to fall apart with too much going on at the same time. But I typically expect that for, like a closed back on ear headphone under the price of $20. Okay. Let's go to Paramore, Still Into You. Probably one of my favorite pop songs to play with headphones. Okay. In the beginning of the song, there's a build-up and like a little, I don't even know, like tapping something really of bright metal. And normally it's almost got like clear ringing sound like a bell, but in this it was almost completely gone. So the treble is definitely being held back. The vocals do sound good. They're okay. Yeah, the vocals are okay. There's a little bit of bloom in them. Maybe I don't know, it's just a bit fuzzy. It's not super clear. And there are times when there's a lot of things happening where I can hear some distortion in the background. So this really has a hard time keeping up with, I don't know what the word would be, congestion in the stage. Still enjoyable though for $10. All right, I'm going to switch over now to the Koss. Immediately, the bass is more elevated on the Koss. It's a step up above everything else, which I wasn't having on the Sonys. The Sonys almost felt more U-shaped. And this I'm having a hard time pinpointing. The bass is definitely more elevated. Yeah, it's really weird. Like, the voice suddenly became fuzzier. But the instruments are actually keeping pace. Let me see. Something a little bit more analytical. Actually, I can go back to Star Wars A. Okay, I'm getting more energy out of the brass. I feel like there was more control over the bass on the Sony, but you're getting a little bit more detail out of the Koss. Let's see. I feel like the extension might be better on the Koss, though. And the sense of stage feels a little like I'm further away from the stage on the Koss. And the Sony feels like you're right up in the front. Yeah, there's just like this bit of veil. That's that's what it is. It's veiled. There I feel like there's some more details, but there's also just something in between you and the music. It could be more distance, but everything feels a little bit I don't know. It depends on what's playing, because when you hit certain points of Magnetron Kick Puncher for New Retro Wave, this like some of the more subdued bass parts feel very clear. And then when the synths kick in for the main line, it feels more veiled. Let's see. Let's go to Thriller. I like that, actually. It's pretty good. All right, let's go back to the Sonys. In the beginning, there's that door opening and then the footsteps moving from right to left. That was kind of interesting. I feel like the Koss handled it better. There's a point, like center left, where it almost feels like he steps up and then down and then to the left again. It's weird. The Koss didn't have that problem. But yeah, right away I could tell you the Sonys feel a lot more in your face. It feels like there's more energy to the synth. So I think the Koss does have more recessed mids. The Koss feel like they have a little bit more air in them. Yeah, that's what it is. I think. Have you ever had that feeling at a live concert where, like, you're right up in front of the speakers and it's so much energy coming at you, it just starts to, like, sound fuzzy? That's kind of how the Sony sound to me. And the Koss puts a little bit more distance between you and the music, and it feels clearer, but less energetic, even though I got them more or less volume matched. And I think the Sony, the balance is a little more pleasing to me. I feel like there is a bass emphasis on the Koss, where if I want to volume match the mids, it would be less enjoyable, I should say. Okay. So I think each is kind of nice. Each one has its own place. The Sonys, I think, are a little bit more enjoyable for things like pop music or music that isn't overly produced, where there's not a ton of music happening in the background in addition to the vocals. I think once you hit that point, they start becoming overwhelmed. And then the Koss actually is quite enjoyable at that point because it's got that larger sense of stage. It has that sense of distance. It doesn't feel as choked. And the drivers don't feel like they're being pushed to their limit, which is kind of nice. But for the music I typically listen to, which is like rock or punk or ska, I think the Sonys are probably going to be in my preference. Because I like that little bit of warmth in the treble, and I like being more upfront in the music. I would rather have the energy than the clarity. There's a couple things I like about the Koss. They actually have something of a more open design. So my ears don't get as hot while I'm wearing them. And I actually like being able to hear what's going on around me with on-ear headphones, because if I'm wearing them walking around, I want to be able to hear if there's cars or other things happening or approaching. So that is a benefit for the use case I would have for these specific types of headphones. Now, neither one is going to be the one I typically wear out and about, because I have a pair of ATH ES990 that I really enjoy, and I think technically sound better. But they're also $200 headphones. In the under $20 category, I think it's really going to depend on your taste, what you're looking for in your music. If you're looking for more like small production, vocalist focused, like at rock or actual like 3 or 4 person band music, or just like some simple synths behind a vocalist, I think the Sony to me is more enjoyable, especially with the tuning it has. if you're listening to something that's a bit bigger, or if you actually want a little bit more bass emphasis on the music, I think the Koss is probably a good way to go. And that's putting aside all of the, the world around you, what your use case is going to be like for that. And that's what it is. I mean, for $10 and $20, I'm going to say one's not like clearly better than the other. It's just going to be a matter of taste. And that's my review of these. I hope you enjoy.